Good evening, everyone. Uh, a very warm welcome to all those who've taken time out to join us for this very important topic, which is what effective boards do differently, best practices that drive impact. My name is Safeena Alam. I lead the Center of Excellence for Board and Governance at India Leaders for Social Sector. And today's session is being joined by none other than Safeena Husain, who's the founder and board member of Educate Girls, and Ujwal Thakar, who's the chairperson, board of directors, Educate Girls, as well as co-founder, Ujwal Impact Advisors. A very warm welcome to both our panelists. But before we begin the question and answer session, I would like to introduce our panelists properly because we can't let this opportunity go. I hope I'm audible. Is my voice absolutely clear?
How would you know? They don't have access.
No, but you can hear me, right, Ujwal?
Yeah.
All right, all right. So in today's panel, we have with us none other than Safeena Husain. She's the founder of Educate Girls. It is an Indian nonprofit which is dedicated to girls' education in some of India's most underserved and remote regions. Among the many recognitions, Safeena has been featured in the Time Women of the Year list 2026. Her book, Every Last Girl, by the way, I also have a copy here, which I finished reading. It traces the amazing journey of building Educate Girls and actually finding that last girl despite all odds. It's something that makes all of us proud. The 2025 Ramon Magsaysay Awards went to Educate Girls for the work, and it's the first Indian nonprofit to be receiving that award. Among other recognition, of course, Safeena has been the first Indian woman to be honored with the WISE Prize for Education 2023. In fact, she spearheaded the Development Impact Bond in education in India and led Educate Girls to become Asia's first TED Audacious project. And it's so beautiful to know that the organization has been able to mobilize more than 2 million out of school girls to mainstream education and have been able to improve learning outcomes of over 2.4 million children since inception. We have with her joining us today is her close confidant, thought partner, champion, and the chairperson, board of directors, Ujwal Thakar. Ujwal, in his illustrious career of over 4 decades, has been a leader in the banking, consulting, and not-for-profit world. He's been a career banker, and he's been associated with some of the largest banks such as SBI, SCB, Times Bank, BNP Paribas, and where he's been in leadership positions as head of retail and private banking. Ujwal has also been actively an advisor to the BFSI practices of leading consulting organizations, including PwC and KPMG. When Ujwal started his not-for-profit journey, he started being the CEO of Pratham, another very well-recognized non-profit education organization. And he worked closely with the likes of Envagul, KV Kamath, Kumaramangalam Birla, Ajay Piramal, Mukesh Ambani, to name a few. And he currently is, he's board chair at Educate Girls. At the same time, he also sits on many boards in the Indian nonprofit ecosystem. During COVID, Ujwal did something interesting. He actually started a development sector pro bono mentoring organization that has now been supporting approximately 60 nonprofits. It is known as Ujwal Impact Advisors. A very warm welcome to both our panelists today, Ujwal and Safeena. Thank you so much for
Thank,
joining us today. Yeah.
thank you.
As we begin this discussion, the reason why we are here, of course, we're going to talk about boards, but I'm going to begin with you, Safeena. Once again, heartiest congratulations on winning the Magsaysay Awards, because it makes us all proud. I think the nation proud, because the core message of Educate Girls is so powerful to resonate with all of us. Do share a little, as we begin this conversation, just help us understand those early days, what those were like. Were you absolutely sure of what you were embarking upon, or were there moments of self-doubt also?
I think this, first of all, thank you so much for inviting Ujwal and me here. We've been partners for what, a decade and a half or more now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think and he has known us since the early days. The early days are always full of self-doubt. Whatever you do. If you ask my husband, he'll tell you about the times that we thought we had no money, we didn't know what would happen. And he will always go back to those months where years where we would be like, अच्छा, organization को बंद करने के लिए कितने पैसे चाहिए होते हैं? Like, because it takes money, resources to actually shut something down.
Yes.
And we would constantly, every once in a while, we'd be like, अच्छा, let's just see if it comes to that, do we have, enough to be able to wind things down, make sure people land on their feet, etc. So the early years are very tough. They are enormously difficult. You kind of have an idea of where you want to go, but you don't really know. For me, I moved to Bombay without knowing anybody. I just knew my father, and I was like staying in his sort of one-bedroom apartment, and I had no network. I didn't know anyone. I had never done any development sector work here in India, and Bombay as a city was new to me. So yeah, it really was kind of starting from zero. So every step felt very tentative and felt very uncertain in terms of where it would take us.
Right, right. No, thank you for being so candid, Safeena. In fact, that's what's leading me to the next question. While we've had an opportunity, at least at ILSS, particularly the Center for Board and Governance, we've had the opportunity to learn about the board journey of Educate Girls from one lens. Yeah, we would now actually like to hear it, from the founder's perspective on this act of curation in terms of, like when you started out, what thoughts did you have about your board in those early years? And then if you were to then come, I'll come to that next question, but if you could answer that.
Yeah. So I have to say, like, before I get to Educate Girls' board and its journey, I just want to give you a sense of my journey with boards first, because everything that you go through becomes your pattern that you kind of learn from, etc. So I had, after university, moved to San Francisco, and I had joined a couple of nonprofits as a volunteer. And I started my development sector journey as a volunteer. And then one of them, it was called IDEX, it's called something else now. IDEX asked me saying, and I was in my, early 20s or whatever, like really young. And I was just doing chotu work for them, like just as a volunteer does, website bana do, ye kar do, wo kar do, choti boti cheeze. And they asked me, they said, could you be the volunteer representative on the board? That was my first sort of exposure to be on the board. And this was a phenomenal board. It had the founder on the board. And that time the board chair was Anne Firth Murray, who, if people don't know of her, but she was the founder of Global Fund for Women, huge feminist, Stanford professor, just this like larger than life person. So I'm just trying to give you a sense of like the kind of people who are on this board. And then they invited 20 something like, somebody who had no clue about life as a volunteer representative. But it was a brilliant sort of exposure for me to see how do boards function? What do people talk about? And then a couple of years later, Anne Firth Murray was stepping down as chair. And the organization asked her, saying, who would you want to take over as chair from you? And she actually put me forward. And it was an insane move. Like, I don't see many organizations will have this the gumption to do it even today, is to have a 20-something take over as board chair of an established nonprofit organization. But not only that, at IDEX, what I also saw was they were making small grants. They also invited their grantees. So Tyagiji, who works in Jodhpur, and some of the legends in the nonprofit sector, I met them because they were invited to be on the board of this grant-making organization. So my experience, even before I started Educate Girls, was through this kind of mentorship, was through this kind of lens of seeing very sort of boards that were very committed to social justice. They were very strong on governance, and they were very risk-taking in that sense. They weren't following this template ki aisa hi hona chahiye, or ek lawyer chahiye, or ek CA chahiye, or, like, which are like some of the sort of calculations that we make. So that was sort of my entry into boards and my own experience with boards. And when I set up Educate Girls, the board journey was like, that time I didn't know anybody. So you start with a friends and family board. I mean, they're the only people you can arm twist into signing your papers. There's nobody else who will do it for you. From that, we moved to like a working board. And then we had, people who would come into the office and look at the audit and do the ta-ta-ta, because I don't know how to do any of those things, right? So it was a very, very, very hands-on working board. And then we kind of moved to what the kind of board we have now, which is a much more strategic governance, high level board. They're not a day-to-day working board. But they kind of, help you with all of those other pieces.
Sure, sure. No, this is very interesting, Safina, given that early on you had the exposure of being, part of the boardroom conversations. And this is something that we also discuss in our different chats that, how about actual true stakeholder representation in the boardroom to actually, understand the pulse of what's happening with the last mile. So that's so beautiful, the example that you shared. I know that you did mention that the friends and family aspect initially, but suppose you were to now, given that Educate Girls is almost 2 decades old, right? So now, how has your thinking, both as a leader as well as given the exposure that you brought with yourself, how has that evolved as Educate Girls has matured as an organization? So in terms of, both the board composition, has that reflected the different stages of growth of Educate Girls? That's something that I'd like to know, and then I'm going to come to Ujwal.
Sorry, I don't completely understand the question. You're talking about how,
So yeah, so you touched upon it briefly that initially your first board was friends and family, and then slowly it became a working board, and then it became a slightly more mature board. So if you were to now look back at your journey, would you be able to match the different stages of the organization's growth with the board composition also
yes,
from that?
definitely. I think when you're first starting out of the friends and family board, you're just doing a lot of like those A/B testing. You're just trying to like go down a lot of different pathways and figure out where you really want to go, right? Like, so there's a lot of this trial, pre-pilot, testing, etc., going down a lot of avenues that then shut down and you kind of come back and say, "Acha, ye nahi kaam kar raha, ye try karte, ye try karte." So it's very much sort of fluid, very, going back and forth. I think by the time we got to the working board, we had actually started to institute a little bit more of a model that was getting tighter. And the board helped to build a lot of those components. So then I didn't have like special, like I only had field people, right? I didn't have somebody who looked at audit and I didn't know what all went into it and things like that. But I didn't have a senior leadership team. So Gul, who was at that time my board chair, he would come in and he would sit with the external auditor. He would make sure the books were being kept properly. He would make sure he helped me actually learn how to make financial projections. How do you do all these? So a lot of that streamlining of the model, and then also the sort of systems of the organization, they helped me to set it up, right? So how do you start to codify things? How do you start to build? So that, from a very fluid testing level, it moved to a much more stronger. Then we moved into when we had the sort of middle management and the senior leadership kind of come in, then we moved to a more mature board because we didn't require those skills from the board. And at that time, we were getting our 5-year strategies made with very strong partner organizations. And the board's job was to help us stress test it. So again, making sure purpose, strategy, those things are fine. And by the time we had like a CFO and things, so making sure then your compliance calendar is in place, et cetera, et cetera. So much more oversight, much more overarching governance, because we were large enough. So I think, Ujwal, when you joined us as board, we were probably, what year would that have been?
Me, Irina,
Yeah,
and
that
you.
was,
That's it.
yeah, that was when? 20.
So 16, when I joined the proper board.
Yeah, so that was like after the dip, which meant that we
But
were
I was on the
already,
advisory board for 4-5 years before that, 3-4 years.
yeah. And so by that time, we were already in, if it was 2015, 2016, we were in like 5 to 8,000 villages, right? So
Yeah.
we had already achieved a kind of a scale.
Yeah.
But and at that point, we moved from a working board to an actually a strategic governance board that we continue with today. And I think the working board came in when we were perhaps at like 1,000 or 2,000 village scale. So that's kind of like the difference in terms of just the size of
Yes.
it. I hope that answers.
Yes, it does. Actually, the reason I'm purposely asking this is there are many in the audience who've joined who also are at different stages of growth in their own organizational journey. So, is there a formula for which board works at what level is what we are trying to focus on? And that's something that's a very useful insight because, we're also trying to see whether there are patterns to it or not and so forth. Yeah. So yeah, this is helpful. Thank you, Safina. Ujwal, I'll come to you now. Ujwal, I know you've had a very, very interesting journey, both your earlier profession and then your, your new profession, which is the social sector, so to speak. Ujwal, you've been associated, I think Safeena just mentioned, you've also been associated with Educate Girls for quite some time now. So just
Yeah.
share a little about your journey, as board member and board chair, your responsibilities, your lens.
So my association with the Educate Girls started way back in 2010 or 11, I think. I was the CEO of Give India, and we were doing something called the India Philanthropy Forum, along with Dasra. And one of the star speakers there was Safeena. I didn't know Safeena from Eve at that point in time. I was a part of the audience which heard her, and I was very impressed. So at the end of her presentation, I gave her my card and said, "Look, Safeena, we must catch up sometime." So of course, being who I am, I forgot about it, but she didn't, luckily. And a month later, we met over coffee, and we had a long chat. And I was most excited about what she was doing because she was doing exactly what Pratham was, but for the girl child. And the program was very similar. It was very small at that point in time. This was year two of Safeena's Educate Girls, and they were only in Pali. So one of the things I said to her in that coffee conversation is that you'll have to need to work with the government if you really want to solve this problem at scale. You know how new entrepreneurs, especially new entrepreneurs who worked abroad, they're fearful of it. It's not that they don't want to work. And Safeena was working with the government, but not working with the government at scale. So one of my first things to her was, look, you have a model which can go across the country, across all the gender gap districts in the country. But the one capability you need to build is working with the farm. So that's where the conversation started. Then she called me for a visit. I went and visited the office and really loved what they were doing. Then I went to the field. Then gradually it grew into being a board uh, advisory board member. And then, including interviewing her management team, I've done jobs at before I joined the board. So it was all friends and family kind of atmosphere then. I think when I first came in, the budget was less than 3 to 4 crore. Uh, Safeena, you'd know better, but I came in before you got the Skoll Award. The Skoll Award you got a year later. That's really where it kicks off. Yeah, but I was used to very different boards. My previous history of boards, both in the development sector and in the banking sector. In the banking sector, my chairman of my board was B.G. Deshmukh, who was the cabinet secretary to 3 prime ministers of India. So a very different, very lovely man. But his whole focus was governance, compliance, that kind of a thing. So when the Times of India management felt that we need to be more aggressive, they brought in S.M. Datta, who was the other extreme from. Suship Datta used to be the chairman of HUL, and he was completely market, market, market. Everything has to be driven by the customer in the market. So there, in banking boards, the focus was on governance, compliance, accountability, performance, financial oversight. Part of the role in a bank board or a corporate board was done by the investors. After every board meeting, you had an investors conference where the investors asked you the most difficult questions. And it was also partly performed by the markets themselves. The markets determined what the organization did. In the development sector, it's very different. It's all founder-centric, mission-centric. My first lesson in the development sector was when I joined as the CEO of Pratham. And the first thing Mr. Wagul told me was that, look, you have only one care, that the founder goes nowhere. I don't care if you do nothing else, but the founder has to continue. And I'm telling you upfront that the founder is very upset that we've got a CEO. Now, that told me about the importance of founder and the founder's energy, relevance, resilience in the non-profit for profit world. And my board in Pratham, was Mukesh Ambani, Kumar Mangalam Birla, Ajay Piramal, Mr. Wagul. My good fortune was that the chairman of the board was Mr. Wagul, who really managed the board beautifully. But the questions that came to the board were like corporate. I mean, I remember my first board, which was 10 days after I joined, and Mukesh Ambani asked me a question on which I fumbled. So Mr. Wagul came to my rescue saying, Mukesh is just joined and, some of these things he's still not exposed to. Mukesh turned around to him and said, Mr. Wagul, he's a professional CEO. Uh, if you want me to be on the board, I'm going to ask him these questions. So, and then there was Mr. Wagul telling me that, you know, you have to be gentle, you have to be kind, you have to do all of that. So balancing out all these things. But my core learning was that in the NGO world, it is the founder who's the fountainhead of everything.
Yes. So, no matter how accomplished you are, there is always that testing ground, baptism by fire, where you're being asked difficult questions on the 10th day of joining in a new sector.
Right.
Yeah, so interesting, Uh,
It's unsettling if you don't have a good chairman.
yeah, totally, totally. I can't even imagine, what you must have felt despite your years of solid experience.
And from Mukesh Ambani, don't forget.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. I can't even begin to imagine. So yeah. Ujwal, I know this whole transition, first
Yeah.
coming from the corporate sector, then becoming CEO of an org, then looking at organizations from a slightly more nurturing lens in
Yeah.
terms of, when you're CEO, you're looking at it as, okay, you're running the shop, you're running,
Yeah.
you have to manage a whole lot of things. But when you are in a nurturing role, that is it goes beyond just accountability, right? It's
Yeah.
far more. It's looking at the organization, well ahead in time. So if you were to now reflect back, has there been maybe one or more than one, any fundamental change in your outlook, like when you entered the social sector and from then to now, what has been that fundamental change in your outlook towards the social sector in India?
The social sector is all about humanity, empathy, and the founder. The corporate sector is about performance, accountability, and shareholder value. Here, in this sector, who's your stakeholder? Your stakeholder is the ultimate beneficiary. In the corporate world, you talk about the customer, all right. I mean, customer is the center of all that you do. But who's the customer here in this sector is a very nebulous thing. Is it the beneficiary? Is it the donor? Is it the employee who's wedded to the mission? So you have to resolve that first in your mind. Key is who is the customer is the first question you ask yourself. Resolve the answer to that and then build your organization around that. Now, the other thing that is different is in the corporate world, resources are rarely a constraint. Here, everything is. Human resources are a constraint, financial resources are a constraint. So you're all the time balancing between one or another. So the ability to balance is a key quality that a NGO board member requires. Uh, Balancing between the founder and the board, balancing between the executive team and the founder, all of that. So those were some of my observations.
Right.
But
Right.
it works when there is mutual respect
Mm.
between the founder and the board. And that is the key. If there is no mutual respect, if the board doesn't respect the founder or the founder doesn't respect the board and that mutual trust is not there,
Mm.
you can kiss the thing goodbye.
Mm. Right.
And why it works in Educate Girls, I can tell you, is there humongous mutual respect. Though I mean, I have to confess that there are board meetings which can be fairly aggressive.
Yes,
Let Safina talk about
Yes,
them.
yes, I'm going to come to that soon. In fact, I would like to bring in both of you, because it's such a complementary role that you play with each other. Clearly, your whole chemistry, if I can use that word, it's very evident. The warmth and the respect that you have for each other. In terms of if I were to, you have spoken a little, Safina, about the recomposition of your board. There was one stage when you felt that you wanted to expand, particularly when you wanted to make it more strategic. Now, what did you have to keep in mind, especially since, this also meant opening the door to greater scrutiny, more questions from the board? So, what was going on in your mind at that time when you were thinking of just expanding the scope of your board?
I think at that time, what I felt like I needed was a very high level strategic board that was really going to stress test the organization. That was one thing. Somebody like that they would have the sort of credibility and the gravitas to hold the mission and to hold the mission very close to them. Because again, the board, in my view, is, holds the soul of the organization, holds the mission, and if the board allows for mission drift and mission creep, that's the place where it should all, because management ke paas day-to-day struggles hote hain, aaj ye hai. They have all these things that pull them in all kinds of directions, right? The board is the gatekeeper and the soul of the mission. The board actually just helps you stay the course and doesn't even allow one degree of separation. So therefore, for me, growing that board meant to have people that the team will respect, who are very, strategic, who come with a lot of pattern recognition, who will actually be able to see 10 steps ahead of the team. Because at the end of the day, combined the experience that they bring, the experience that Ujwal brings or that Irina brings to the table, or that Sumit Bose, he's been finance secretary and education secretary and all the rest of it. Their pattern recognition, their wisdom altogether is what the mission really needed. But like I think for every single one of them, and at least I knew with Ujwal, he'd been to the field, like how engaged and how much he was connected with this mission. And that I knew that this mission was personal for him. He will not, over his dead body, that you can do this or you can do that, right? Like, so everybody on the board actually does take the mission very personally, which is good and bad. Like, because a lot of the fights that you have, a lot of the aggression that comes is because when they fear that you are trying to take a shortcut and you're trying to do some, silly, convenient thing in that moment. So I think that is what. Second, I think one is just like the holding of the mission, very right here. The second was network. The mission needed a broader platform and it needed door openers. So a lot of, board members that we have can basically open any door in the country right now, right? Like they can pick up because they have that kind of network and they have that kind of so I think those were the two or three things. And then the third was, again, because they are on various boards, because they're so deeply experienced in an environment where compliance, etc., changes fast and there's so much navigation to be done, right? Like, so to have a very, very, very thoughtful and experienced board to help you do that was also incredibly key for us. Because I have to say, like, these are not skills that founders bring to the table. It's like absolute duffer when it comes to stuff like this, right? So you do need somebody at the board who is really, really, really kind of holding that piece very tightly. So that's what we were looking at. And then I think finally was like technology. So again, like I don't understand technology as much as, like a Ganesh Natarajan does. So the board was built very much around the needs of the mission.
Sure, it's so nice that you mentioned particularly, board holding the org, the leadership accountable to the mission of the organization and not allowing any kind of drift. I'll tell you why, because when I was reading your book also, and I also come from the field, so I could visualize a lot of those things, and I was like, it is so easy to have been sucked into so many interrelated problems that you would have encountered, witnessed, and you would have wanted to solve for, that to be able to remain true to your mission sometimes could be very challenging. And I don't know if you ever felt that way, but at least that's the feel I got as I was listening, as I was reading through the different case studies, the various your what are they called? Balikas, right?
Team
The
Balikas,
team
yeah.
Balikas, team Balikas,
Yeah.
it's so nice, so heartwarming. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely
No,
that.
there's the internal pressure because you're seeing other problems. You're like, अच्छा ये भी कर लेते हैं, ये भी कर लेते हैं.
Yeah,
Then I think externally people kind of say to you, अच्छा ये भी कर लो ना. Like they think like because you're already doing it at scale, but actually
yeah,
that scale is enabled only because of the absolute laser focus
yes.
on the mission and what it means.
Very true. Very true. So, and do come in, Ujwal. I mean, this is a question for both of you. Has there been, okay, not on this question, the next one, which is that, has there been any mechanism in terms of, how do you go about measuring the success of your board? Is there any self-assessment that the board does for itself, or is there basically the candid sharing? Is it a two-way kind of a relationship that happens?
Ujwal, you want to talk about this or you would Ujwal has left. He's like,
No, no,
"Bahut
no,
ho gaya."
he's here. He's back here. He's here,
No, I'm
and
kidding.
I'll just, yeah. Ujwal, can you hear us? All right, so, maybe Safeena, you can start, and then Ujwal will come in. He can talk about his lens.
Yeah. So you're saying does the board like do any kind of
Yeah,
like
is there,
self-assessment, etc.?
yeah, as in how would you, now looking back, how would you measure success? How would you say that your board is very successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I feel like the board is enormously successful.
Mm,
One is that every board meeting, and I'm not saying this, and again, the board has been in place for like over a decade now, like almost a
mm,
decade. And the newest
mm,
member, I think, is like 8 years old
mm,
in the system. But this is something we hear even for the board members themselves, that every single board meeting
mm.
feels like a learning space. Everybody says, "Oh my God, I learned something and I went." And that is
Yeah.
phenomenal, right? Like, so that everybody's bringing something to the table. And I'll tell you, I have in the past seen rubber stamp boards. And that's like, it looks like great on paper, but their
Yes.
rubber stamp board is the most demoralizing thing that you can do for yourself and for your mission. Like, I'm just going to put this out there, right? It's the worst thing. The minute the board is just saying yes, 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 and sab acha hai, aur aap kitne achhe, aur hum bhi kitne achhe, and whatever, you know that you actually have a problem and you're not going to grow. Right. But when you have a board which is challenging each other and challenging the team and challenging on every single purpose, around, I mean, every piece around the purpose, it becomes a learning exercise for everyone. And I think that is what, for me, at least one measure of success for the board. The second is that sometimes a lot of these discussions can then go kind of like a little heated. The board does have a self-correction mechanism. So, for example, in a couple of meetings, I remember several years ago, and that time Lewis was heading our finance committee meeting. And I kind of called him and I was like, "Listen, hey, Lewis, I don't think it's really working." Lewis immediately, as a finance committee member, called the other members. "Okay, yeah, fine. Let's just dial stuff down where it requires." Or on the other hand, if the board members needed to sort of convey something and they felt like, okay, Safeena's not listening, they may also lean into the board chair and he will very gently, in all his wisdom, प्यार से he will समझाओ me कि अभी तुम थोड़ा सा dial down करो, अभी इतना don't, your expectations are kind of out of whack or whatever. So there is, and that's why I think, like, I mean, you're talking about good fortune. My good fortune has been to have Ujwal as chair, right? Because it is such a dance. That self-assessment, you can do it on paper and pen, but it can have zero meaning. But you can actually have a learning, a rich learning space. You can have self-correction mechanisms, but what it really requires is a wise board chair. And it's a dance, like it's a dance between the CEO and the board chair and the founder and the board chair and the rest of the members and the board chair. And that is a space for wisdom and maturity. And if you have that, then I think it works kind of well, and then the board chair's role becomes mainly to help assess and do those things.
Right.
So I'm back.
Yes,
Can
it
you hear
was.
me?
Yes. Did you hear the question
Yes.
before you
No,
lost
I
connection?
got the
Okay.
question. I
All right.
heard Safeena out, and I
Okay.
completely agree with her. It's a learning experience for every member of the board, and I can guarantee you that because they bring such diversity of experience, connections, insights that I'm wowed every time I come out of the Educate Girls board meeting. Because, and part of the credit goes to how the board has been assembled. They're also all very mission aligned. I mean, if you ask me what is the purpose of the board, it is to convert this organization from a founder-centric organization to a mission-centric organization over a long length of time. I mean, 3 years back, we brought in a CEO. We brought in a second CEO now. But the work will take another 8 to 10 years. I mean, it's not easy to replace a founder like Safeena, any founder, but a founder like Safeena, even less easy. So this whole long-term mission is to create this institution which will survive post all of us. And so therefore the thinking is long-term. Now there's no formal mechanism that we've instituted, but as the chairman, I look at is the management becoming stronger? Is the management team becoming stronger? Which I think it is. Then is risk better management? I mean, this is one of the organizations which has a risk management strategy, a risk management register. I don't know many corporates who have that, but this has all been home developed uh, thanks to finance committee and other committees of the board. We have a people's committee. I mean, if I were to tell you about the discussion at the last board meeting, uh, the presentation was made. I was very impressed with the presentation. And Irina gets up and says, "Hey, Gayatri, your presentation, I heard it and I cried. Not because I liked it, but because I hated it." And we were stunned. But her observation was, she said, look, I could have been in the board presentation room of Taj Hotels or Wipro or any of those boards, and I would have said, wow, there. But this is not what Educate Girls is about. It's about the soul of Educate Girls. Now, have we driven you to become a Taj Hotels or a Tata Sons and left Educate Girls behind? That was what made me cry. Now, the immediate outcome of that was after the board meeting next day, Safeena, Gayatri met and said, yeah, how do I mean, if this is the impression of a board member, how do we actually do something to get the soul of the organ, not that it's gone, but to revive it and to ensure that every single person, the 23,000 team balikas, the 2,000 employees, understand the mission of the organization, the soul. So these are some of the things that happen there. So this mission cascade to the last employee is very important. And is the organization becoming less founder dependent? Are people running every now and then to Safeena and say, hey, I have a problem? Now, so more or less, I think in 5 to 7 years, we'll be able to tell Safeena, yes, I think we can do without you.
Yeah, that's going to
But
be.
before that, I'll be gone. So
No, I think that'll be very bittersweet, you know. It always comes with mixed feelings, right? But no, thank you. This really it just warms your heart just listening to your experiences. I know Safeena had briefly touched upon, let's say, how the role of board chair and the role that you have been playing, being that cushion, that protector of the leader, at times, even like vis-a-vis the board, the larger board. Do shed a little light on that also, uh, the whole navigating tension at the board level.
yeah, so basically it's a bridge between the founder, the CEO, and the board. Uh, you have to provide your shoulder many times. Sometimes you have to bear the brunt of people's anger, uh, a board member's anger sometimes. sometimes the frustration of the CEO. But and my learnings are all from Mr. Wagul. He had a story for every complaint that I ever had with him. I don't have stories for it, but I have an empathetic ear and I try and sort of listen to them, chat with them, try and divert their attention to something else and bring it back to the problem. But so far, we've had a great team. In the sense of the tensions have never lasted a week after they surfaced. And that is the wisdom of all people concerned. Uh, the board members, the founders, the CEO. One of the other roles I play is a cheerleader for the management team. And critically important because we give them such a hard time at the board meeting. I mean, you should hear us analyzing their presentations or questioning them on their presentation. Sometimes it feels like overreach. I know Safeena has come to me and said, sir, I'm feeling depressed at the end of this meeting. But it is all well intentioned. So, as the board chair, one of the roles I've assigned to myself is making one downs feel good about themselves.
Nice,
and
nice.
and the retention in that team is huge.
Mm.
We've hardly lost anyone. Have we lost anyone at all in the last 2 years?
No, not at
Yeah.
all. And I think ये जो बुरा लगता है ना, that's just like ego bruising. Like, थोड़ी ego को ठेस पहुंचती है.
Right.
That's why it like अरे मतलब ये कैसे, but
But
I have
it
to
is
say,
all.
like, because the board is not prescriptive, that's why it doesn't last. Board is
Yeah.
showing you कहाँ पे you are like your thinking is not up to the mark, or the board is showing you कि where you can do better, or the board is showing you कि ये तुमने risk देखा ही नहीं है, या तुम इतनी ज्यादा metrics mania में चले गए हो कि you have forgotten the soul of it. And again, the team is trying to do the best. Like, the team is trying to anticipate what the board really wants. Is it the metrics? And they think they're doing a great job with the metrics, right? So there's a little bit of a course correction that happens constantly, actually, between expectations and what's happening. But I think it all stays in the board meeting. The board doesn't then get into sitting on their head कि अब इसको ऐसे करो या वैसे करो. It is only at the board meeting, and then you're free to go and do whatever you need to do rest of the quarter, and then till you come back to the board meeting, and you better be prepped before you come back and you've looked at all of those things. So this non-prescriptive nature, so it is stretching, it is growth oriented, it is really pulling people up and helping them deliver their best, but it isn't a prescription on the solution कि तुमको मैं जैसे बोल रहा हूँ वैसे करने की जरूरत है. So there's a slight distinction. But I have to also just kind of tell you, one way that our board is very different is that we have, right since the beginning, always decided that we would not have donors on our board. And therefore, there's a lot of this strategic discussion, blah, 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 but there is no sort of donors that ever. So your strategy is completely divorced from money. So everything that is being discussed, every decision that is being taken is stress tested in a way that, is this the best thing for that last girl? It is not, is this the best thing for that donor? Is this the best thing for that CSR? Is this the best thing for whatever? We worship at the altar of that last girl, right? So in some ways, that's why it can also feel much more personal, because the decisions are being made for that. So have we chosen an easier geography when we could have gone to a harder one, जहाँ ज्यादा लड़कियां हैं out of school, but आपने वो छोड़ दिया क्योंकि, but you're choosing something close to home or whatever. So that's the kind of thing. I'm just giving you, just sort of examples to be like where that tension comes from, but it is a very constructive and productive tension, because the board is almost the voice for that last girl. So it is mandating the organization, and the board is also always watching for that 1 degree of separation. You accommodated this one donor and started building toilets. Like, not that we did, but I'm just saying, like, अरे आ रहा है पैसा तो ले लो kind of a thing. Where do you say no to money? Where do you say, that's the hardest thing, right? So really the board is kind of doing that in a way.
Right. Right. Yeah, that's a very valid point that you've raised in terms of,
No, and sometimes what happens is that some of the risks you don't realize when you're in the execution mode.
Right.
I was talking last week with someone. We got a big grant for work in a border with Pakistan district from a foreign agency. For work which was not at too much drift with the mission, it was slightly different. And so everyone was gung-ho on it. The grant was $1 million. Uh, Everything was nice. We knew how to do that work. Uh, it didn't feel like mission drift. Till Irina came in and said, "Hey guys, do you realize what kind of risks you're taking working in border districts with the foreign funding?" Now, these things happen when you have different people with different insights. And putting it very bluntly and forcefully, no holds barred. I mean, she'll darling you with it, but bluntly telling you want to kill the organization.
Right.
Okay, you want to
Right.
kill the organization, darling. That would be the conclusion.
Right. Right. No, absolutely. I hear you on that. And it's so easy to fall into that,
Yeah.
into that trap, not trap, but situation, which then can escalate into something
See,
else.
nothing may have gone wrong ever, but
Yeah.
if it did, it would so badly go wrong
Correct.
that
Correct.
we would be dead.
Very true. Very true. One question here, I think, for Safina is, what is your advice to, founders and advisors on maintaining this golden balance, the thought partnership without blurring decision boundaries? Because we've heard many a story of, leaders, founders struggling with that also at times.
Yeah, so I think on few things that I have kind of seen work. Also, like when I first started out at IDEX, we used to have a board induction manual and a board manual per se and things like that. So I mean, there are ways to sort of tactically sort of deal with that. But I think for me, some of the things that have kind of helped are we make 5-year strategies. So a lot of the dissent or a lot of the discussion or a lot of that stuff happens during that time. And we take about a year to build a 5-year, like a 10-year vision, a 5-year strategy. So once you're aligned on the strategy, which is the bloodletting work, believe me, and it happens once in 5 years, so that's okay, but it's bloodletting, right? But once you're aligned and you're like, okay, this is what we are going to chase, and this is what the destination 5 years down the line looks like, then those decision things in the middle are not that many. Because it's quite clear that the management decision is the management decision. If you're going to change the destination, actually, even the board can't change the strategy after we've decided upon it, right? Like, so it gives people clarity and sort of minimizes these day-to-day management kind of struggles. I think when you don't have that, you're leaving more room open for interpretation, and then different people interpret things differently, and then therefore you have, उन्होंने ऐसा सोचा था, आपने ऐसा सोचा था, etc. And that also, like for us, becomes a Bible, not just for the board and the management, but also for your last field staff. Everybody knows कि हम 5 साल में क्या कहाँ पहुंचेंगे, कितने राज्यों में जाएंगे, क्या करेंगे, etc. etc., etc. So yeah, so
Yeah.
that kind of helps. I think having no donors on the board helps because you can always just stay very, very, very true to mission and strategy. Yeah, and then again, I think that allows for the non-prescriptive nature, so sort of minimizes it, and it's easier to see kind of role clarity between the management and the board.
Sure. There are some audience questions also coming up. I know there's one that relates mainly to the fundamentals of board meeting, and we'll pick those up right away. But if I were to just ask maybe one question in terms of, if you could highlight certain key takeaways from this entire Educate Girls' board experience for both of you, in terms of two lenses. One is best practices that have strengthened. Part of it you've already covered, if there's anything else that you would like to add, and certain non-negotiables in an executive board relationship that you have practiced, and you have also reflected upon.
Can I go first on that? So on the best practices fund, every board meeting, we have a board CEO 1 hour meeting before the board meeting starts, where complete honesty, 100% transparency, the CEO talks about her fears, her achievements, whatever is happening, and where she needs help, which she doesn't want to talk in presence of the other team. Now, that is a fantastic practice because it builds a bond between the CEO and the board. The board also gets a clear picture of what concerns the CEO has. And generally, the relationship improves. High transparency and honesty, both of these things get strengthened because of these one CEO with board meetings, and which is a ritual that we practice at every board meeting. It's not the board begins with the CEO individual meeting. Then informal engagements of the board members with top team management team. For example, Louis used to be mentoring the CF. These things help hell of a lot. I've seen the confidence of the CFO grow after the mentoring assignments. Similarly, Sumit will go with the government relations person to a chief secretary of a state government. Sumit's presence just alters the picture completely. So having board members who are actually so wedded to the mission that they will accompany CEOs or even heads of divisions to go and meet other functionaries is very, very important. And in our case, board meetings therefore become strategic conversations. They're not presentations anymore. Invariably, they're about insights and they're about strategy. Yeah, that's all.
Yes, Safina.
I would just add, I think in terms of some of the best practices, one is that we have very regular board meetings, like kind of every quarter. And one field visit, like one meeting which is held in the field. And I think that really helps to keep grounding everybody every year back into the mission and what's changed on the ground, etc. I think I do want to cover about fundraising because I think this is something that everybody, thinks that boards help with fundraising. So while we don't have any donors on our board, I do want to kind of maybe cover that piece of like, how does our board help us with fundraising? One is that by stress testing the strategy to a great level, right? They're actually giving you a good, the strategy and the pitch is super tight, right? And it's stress tested at that level. And therefore, it actually makes it easier for you to go and fundraise. That's one thing. So giving you a good pitch in hand by, trial by fire. Then the second is opening doors. So, we ask for warm introductions constantly at the board meetings and getting us in front of people. Finally, like Ujwal has done, he's come on road shows with us. So when we go and we do events and we do presentations to new donors, etc., to give them that comfort and credibility from the board lens, they will come along. And like you said, even for government meetings or for any kind of stakeholder interactions, but especially for fundraising, that has really helped us. For many of the donor conversations, the board is available for due diligence conversations or whatever else. So the board actually, so I was looking at it, majority of the money we raise year on year either is a donor referral or a board referral. It's a warm introduction from the board. So the board is playing a very strong role in fundraising without actually having, the sort of a give-get policy or this, that, or the other. They do, so that is on fundraising, field visits. Board is also kind of setting the tone a little bit for the culture of the organization. A lot of the culture is about continuous improvement. It is about evidence-driven decision-making, et cetera, et cetera. So a lot of those components, I think the board is also helping us kind of do. But yeah, overall, yeah, I think Yeah, strategy. And those just like zero mission drift, mission creep is, I think,
Right.
the biggest one from the board.
Right, right. In fact, I mean, there are a whole bunch of questions from the audience. There's one particular question, I'll begin with that, which talks about, how important it is to have in-person board meetings versus virtual and whether it is effective or not. This is a question from Shri Sinha, Chair of Board of Trustees, Shoshat Seva Sangh. I think part of it you also answered that even if the others are virtual, at least one board meeting will happen in the field once a year, right?
If you ask me, all four should be.
Should
And
be.
they
I did.
used to be, this
Yeah.
COVID like kind of ruined it for people.
Yes.
Yeah.
But now our board has been discussing again and saying, let's just have them, because the kind of feedback, everything that you get in person, you just cannot replicate it online. So now we're saying field visit to hai hai, but
Right.
even beyond that, at least 1 to 2 meetings in person
Mm-hmm.
versus online. So definitely the preference would be for in person.
Right, right. There's another question, and there are a whole bunch that's coming up. Is in terms of this is also something that we covered in terms of is there any metrics or indicators to assess effective boards? Which boards can use for their own evaluation. I think that's part of what Ujwal did answer. That
Yeah.
uh, is there anything else that you would like to add on that front, or I think it is covered, right? Shoaib, I hope that answers your question because Ujwal was talking about even if there are no forms to be filled, so to speak, but just staying very true to the mission and always keeping the last stakeholder, the last mile stakeholder, as the fundamental, the unit of consideration, I would say, for anything that relates to educate girls, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. All right. I think this is a question from Suman Dasgupta. He says, who drives the organization, CEO, founder, or the board? And how does one ensure that nobody is losing ownership? Uh, any thoughts?
I think all three
Yeah.
have very different roles, first of all. So if I had to give you the kind of like the analogy for it, at least for Educate Girls, between the founder and the CEO is kind of like driving the car, right? And the founder is actually just making sure that they have the best engine. So like for me, I do a lot of program design, right? So in that sense, just making sure कि अगर खड़खड़ आवाज आ रही है engine से, then from the program design perspective, it's my job to kind of figure out that is all, and she has the best engine to kind of drive it to its destination. So that's just between the CEO and the founder, sort of a distinction. Ujwal, from the board lens, anything?
Just challenging whatever you guys are doing, and I mean challenging it for insights and providing insights.
Right, right.
So we are strategic support to the organizers.
Right, right. There's another question from Smita Jha. Smita's asked, any examples that you would like to share of how board ensures this balance between accountability versus innovation or strong governance versus strategic oversight? And are there any real tensions in the board related to these?
Safeena, I'll leave it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are
no tensions.
No tension, but like no, they're constructive tensions. Like so, when I was first doing the bond, I mean, the board was just like, why? You're raising the money, nothing is off. Like, why the hell do you want to go and do this? Right? Because it sucked up so much of my time. It was 5% of the budget, but it was just like, but for me as a founder, it was just so key. It was so key because I kind of felt like very quickly when 5,000 villages, I can't see 5,000 villages. I cannot be there. This is hyper vigilance. Like, are you even having impact? Right. And the whole idea of the bond was that you would then build an outcomes focus within the DNA of the organization, that whether you're working with 1 girl, 10 girls, 10 million girls, you're still delivering results and being able to measure that, like each dollar, what is the result it's creating. So for me as a founder, it is very key. But like it was very hard. And I think this is just the tension between a lot of the times that I see repeating is between the founder and the board or the management can be because the founder is somebody who brings that vision and they're thinking like very, very, very long term, right? But how do you get everybody else to see the road that you're seeing as a founder? That's where the struggle comes in. Even when I was doing the Pragati design, right? Like the board was like, why? What is this for? This is just a distraction. This should just be a separate organization. This should just be. And again, all of that tension is really good because I'm going to get that tension outside from the donors also. So it is better to resolve it. But once they see it on the ground, once they saw what it was doing, like they kind of felt like, okay, fine, this is. But there is almost like this time lag that also comes between what the founder is seeing and then the founder's capability to help everybody else in the system see that same road. That's the constant struggle, essentially.
Safeena, if I can supplement that, when Pragati came in, its precursor was something called the Adolescent Girl Program. And I remember telling Safeena at least 5 times that, look, I have no faith in this program because it's materially different from what you do. And it's 10x more complicated. It's 10x more expensive. I don't know what you're going to achieve with this. But she said it's a pilot and it's a pilot at scale. So having the faith that the board had in Safeena, we said okay to the pilot. And when the pilot worked is when really the Pragati started. So at some level, the confidence in the founder and the realization that the founder needs toys to play with at all times. And that experimentation is very important to the founder's game. I mean, if the founder stops experimenting, then the organization won't last for long. So encouraging the founder to experiment with new ideas, if you can afford the budget, is what we do.
Interestingly put, Ujwal. Founder will need their toys to play with. All right. Great. There's one question from Indraneel. He asks, if you had to identify one mindset shift that separates high impact boards from functional boards, what would that be?
Out of syllabus for me.
Okay. All right.
I think
Safeena?
like I think for me, I have seen boards that are very, very, very average. And they are average because the conversation is very, how should I say this? Like very day to day on that moment. High impact boards are those that are actually having the conversation at a much higher level in terms of strategy, in terms of vision, in terms of risk, in terms of all of those things, and a much more are helping you future proof it. So I'm trying to think of an example. I'll keep thinking, but I think, but that's what I see. And I see it like every single time I go to some boards and it's just like, "Oh, we did this, we did this, we did this, great. Why don't you like okay. So the advice is just so incremental. It's just very
It's reactive, if I
incremental
may say so.
and reactive versus, but that also really depends is the kind of meat you bring to the table. So how much strategic, like, what are you bringing to the table that then leads to a conversation which is just like very day to day and very average, or it's a very high impact. So what the management actually brings will allow you. And sometimes I know that at the board meeting, we've done a good job because the board is like, hey, all the information was at the right level for people to have a higher order and more high impact conversation. So that I think is the bigger one, but I think in some ways it is the role of the management to drive that.
Sure.
It's like what you give is what you get.
Yeah.
It's about clarity at the end of the day. I mean, is the founder clear about what she expects from the board? If that clarity is not there, if the strategic clarity is not there, then boards have no role. In case of high impact boards, the founder is very clear about what he or she wants of the boards.
Right.
Very clear about the path of action. And that gets refined from the board. But basic clarity on both expectation and what they want is there.
Right. No, totally, totally. I would really request the audience. I know we have very little time left. We have another 10 minutes or so, but if you could keep your questions a little concise, that would be very helpful for us to be able to ask. There's one question, and this is something that a lot of organizations have been contemplating. Sucheta has asked this question, like when we form a board, is there any protocol for payments to board and meeting intervals, so to speak?
In the not-for-profit world, largely payments are not.
Right.
And I mean, I am a believer that they should not be made. So, because you're coming to give back. There are, I know a couple of board members who are paid, but I would say 95 to 99% of board members are not paid, and for good reason. I would also expect some problem from the regulator if there are paid board members with the ATG or the FCRA and all of that. But haven't heard of any cases where the regulator has stepped in.
Yeah, no, only I think expenses, travel expenses, etc., reimbursed at cost, but no payment to boards.
Right, right. There's another interesting question, and this is something raised by Chand Ujwal. How do you convince donors to support organizational development instead of just program management metrics?
On the CSR side, it's almost impossible because of the constraints that they have because of their guidelines. But if you go with a good narrative to a foundation,
right,
then it's possible. I mean, with educate girls is not the right example because they have enough free funds for doing this because of the clarity of the narrative. Their past proof of concepts and their past performance plus the clarity of the future. But even any other organization which replicates that will be able to raise money for organizational development. Safeena, you have a view?
Yeah, no. I mean, I think that's the way we raise funds is very different. It is very much instead of we don't do any projects, right? So we are raising all funds against the strategy that has been laid. So people are investing in our next 5-year strategy, which is how the money also ends up being more flexible because the destination over 5 years is well defined. Therefore, people are comfortable giving you multi-year commitments, etc. Right? So, and that's why I was saying that's where the board plays the role. So we don't have the conversation around metrics with individual donors because the board has already stress tested that. And we have all the best metrics possible for that is fit for that sort of 5-year vision and strategy, right? So yeah, that's the way we kind of look at it.
And when the strategy is being developed, the full board sits with the consulting firm at steering committee meeting.
Right. Right. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. There is another question by Sudeep. First of all, he congratulates Safeena on, such a well-structured and productive board. However, his view is that there are many non-profit boards who do not seem to be extracting the maximum value, particularly the orgs, from their board. And the only key expectation, and this we keep hearing, is around fundraising. So what's your advice on fundamental steps that the founders need to take to be able to transform, how effective the board can be?
Yeah, and I think that's because people think that fundraising is somehow divorced from their program strategy. At least in our experience, because we don't do any projects, right? We don't sit down with any donors and say, "Chaliye project banate hain 2 saal ka, aapki factory ke piche," or whatever, right? So this is where I really think like it's your strategy, it's your pitch, it's what your vision is that you need to raise money against, not the other way around. So the board's role is helping you have the best strategy, the best pitch, the best, and therefore which are the best doors to open for that. And then the fundraising is actually a subset of that. But sometimes people forget that and they start with the fundraising and then say, "Acha, iske saath hum strategy bana lenge." Right? Which is a whole other sort of way of doing things, which I think is kind of suboptimal because that is what drags you in different direction. Therefore, you cannot hold on to your mission.
Yeah.
Because you
I'll
will
give you an
आज उसने ये
example.
बोला, आज उसने ये बोला, आज उसने ये बोला, आज इधर के लिए पैसे हैं तो ये बना लो, आज उधर के लिए पैसे हैं तो वो बना लो. Therefore, you will not scale. Therefore, people will not stay with you for long. I mean, we have a 90% donor retention rate. Why? It is because they see a very clear value proposition to their money, and they see this, how that year on year and over 5 years, what their money is achieving, and they're able to come down a journey of impact with you. So you are able to build much more deeper relationships. So everything kind of starts from that. But जब आप fundraising को अलग देखते हो and as a means on its own, then वो सारा कुछ निकल जाता है. Then it doesn't work.
And I'll give you a counter example. I'm on another advisory board, 35-year-old organization, outstanding founder, budget around 30 crores. But the first thing she'll talk about is, I've done 440 projects. I've been trying to tell her for the last 2 years that if you build a story and a narrative around your next 5 years plan, you'll go from 40 crores to 200 crores. But it's got into the DNA of the organization that we are a project-based organization. Now, after 2 years of hammering, a little change I noticed now. And last week I got a call from her saying that we've got a first multi-year 5 crore grant. So hopefully she'll buy into going pure strategy
Yeah.
over project.
Yes, yes. So yes, many organizations, they are used to talking about the work that the
And an outstanding founder, and nothing missing there.
Yeah.
Is that the DNA?
Yeah. There's one question from Rajiv. Rajiv, who actually he is a visually impaired musician and founder of Anhad Arts Foundation. It's a relatively new organization. So his question is that, particularly for new founders who are completely new to the social sector ecosystem and do not have access to large CSR networks and so forth, how can they thoughtfully approach and build a strong board or advisory group of people who can genuinely guide the organization with governance and long-term vision? So basically, scouting for your first thought partners, your first council of elders, how does that happen? When you don't have, you're not even, perhaps it'll be difficult to convince very strong people to join your board also. Yeah.
The first part is to build a narrative. Why do you exist? What is the problem you are solving? And what is your theory of change? Once you get clarity on the narrative, then it's not that difficult to get an advisory board member, because people will sympathize with the cause. People, when they believe that you have a solution and you're tackling a big problem, they don't mind coming in. But if you go and say that I am visually challenged, therefore come and join my board, it doesn't happen. You need your story in place. You need fully fleshed out narrative. He can call me. I'll chat with him later.
Yes. In fact, for those who are still posting questions, I'm taking the liberty to perhaps, we'll respond to these maybe after this, in case we run out of time and we don't have enough. We will try to capture these as well. I think one of the questions that has come is, through your different stages of growth, what has been your process while inviting someone on the board? This is one question. And there is another interrelated question, but from a different person, which is it okay to set very clear expectations from the board on opening doors? And would you advise early stage organizations to set a tenure for the initial board?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's an easy, quick question to answer. Yes, set expectations. Yes, set a tenure. Yes, get to know them before you commit to a longer period of time. All of those
Start
things.
as an advisory board member.
Yeah, and really get to know that person.
Right. In fact, just to call it out, we do talk a lot about advisory board members, but I think the whole conversation that we've just had is largely about the Educate Girls' governing board, right? Just stating that for the
Yes,
audience.
absolutely.
Yeah. Great. I think there is, again, it's about advisory board, do's and don'ts. Reach out to us. We'll help you. Don't worry about that, the advisory board piece. I think we're almost at time. There's one question about the difference between a board member of an NGO and corporate. I think, Ujwal, you've already responded to that. Uh, there's one question around, sharing year-wise duration period for the transition to a structured board. So what I'm understanding is basically Alok is trying to understand the stages, right? I think that's what, because the question is partly unclear. Kindly share the year-wise duration period for the transition to a structured board. That's his question. Perhaps it's a newer organization.
So I would say 2 to 3 years as advisory board member should give the founder a sense
Hmm.
of whether the person is useful, not
Hmm.
useful,
Hmm.
and then the transition can happen or exit can.
Right. Any guardrails of what the founder CEO should not do with board members? This is Dr. Ruha Shadab of Led by
Yeah.
Foundation.
Hi,
I
Ruha.
think like not to see them as people you're extracting things from.
Hmm.
They are relationships. And I think that goes for everything, right? Like your donors,
Hmm.
it's about relationships. But even with boards, it is really about relationships. And sometimes we are very transactional.
Yes.
There are boards that get invited on, and I don't hear from them apart from like the board meeting. There's no like relationship building. It's just like, okay, you come to the board meeting, you give me this, and you leave, kind of a thing. So
Yeah.
just that's not necessarily the best way to sort of
Right.
structure these relationships.
Great. Thank you so much, Safeena and Ujwal, for your amazing insights. I am going to ask one last question to Safeena because we are at time, which is what will be the biggest headline of Educate Girls a decade from now? And with that, I will just stop and yeah.
If we're successful, it will be that India will have a lifelong learning and progression opportunities for all girls, regardless of when they may drop out of school, when their education gets interrupted, whenever they want to come back to education, they will be able to come back and
Yes.
finish it, because education can start, stop, and restart at any point. So that's what will be a reality.
Excellent. We do thank you once again, Ujwal, Safeena, for sharing your insights, for this amazing conversation, and more power to you, your board, and I hope you achieve all that you've set out to achieve. We are with you. Yeah, thank you so much.
So much.